Hello, my name is Charlie Hank with the Historical Committee. Today we're going to be conducting a leadership recall with David S. Butler, Presidential Member of Society, who was the Society President 1989-1990. Welcome, David.
Well, thank you.
David, I'd like to start off, if you would, give us a little background on yourself, your engineering history.
Okay, I am from Jackson, Mississippi. I moved there in 1967 from Meridian, Mississippi, and I was employed at that point in time by a consulting engineering firm. I had received my education in engineering at Mississippi State University, graduating in 1965, and moved to Jackson, as I said, and then worked for a consulting firm for a couple of years, and then I worked for utility company, Mississippi Valley Gas Company, for a couple of years in their marketing department. Then I opened up my own practice, engineering practice, in 1972. And I've had that practice since 1972, and currently partners with another fine ASHRAE member, George Jackins, who heads up our Birmingham office, and I have the Jackson office responsibilities. So consulting has been the career that I've been in for so many years.
Now, how'd you get involved in ASHRAE then?
Well, it was quite neat. I was going through the chairs as we do in the chapter, and it came my year to be vice president. And I was told when I became vice president, one of the duties that I had to perform was to attend the CRC in St. Louis. And my first question was, well, what is the CRC? And I was the guy that was president at that time, who was going to be the delegate, said, well, I really don't know what CRC stands for. We later found out it was Chapter's Regional Conference. So this is like 1977, and went to St. Louis and met Hugh McMillan and some other society leaders who were there at that meeting. And the second day, I went to an educational activities workshop, and I've always had an interest in the educational process and reaching out to students to actually interest them and hopefully encourage them to become involved in our industry. But I really got excited about what ASHRAE was doing in other chapters and what it could do and what it could mean for our chapters and for our members. And the guy who conducted that workshop, by the way, was George Jackins, and George and I became fast friends, and I really enjoyed working in the chapter. And then I went ahead and served as chapter president the following year, and I was elected by our region to serve them as regional vice chairman for education, following George Jackins. So I served 3 years as regional vice chairman for education, and I was elected as Region 7 director, or chairman rather, and a director. And I served those 3 years and thoroughly enjoyed it. And I was indeed fortunate enough to be asked to continue and serve as a director at large, which I did for 2 years. Then I was elected as the society vice president, and served that office for 2 years, as we did at that time. I was not, as I said earlier, able to serve a term as treasurer due to the untimely death of Tom Brown and some shuffling that had to take place to keep the continuity within the executive committee that the nominating committee had to do. And but I did serve 2 years as vice president, then a year as president-elect, and then in 89 and 90 was the society president.
What was your theme for the year that you were society president?
Well, I've always felt like that the strongest resource that we have in ASHRAE are the people in ASHRAE, the members of ASHRAE. I'm convinced that the people that are involved in chapter activities, regional activities, and society activities are people who are committed not only to their own profession and their own livelihood, but they're committed to society and to humanity. And I think that we have the cream of the crop in ASHRAE in that regard. And I wanted to, during my year as president, to focus on the volunteer member of ASHRAE and what they have contributed over the years to our industry and, of course, ultimately to the people who enjoy our technology. And so I chose as my theme that year, Volunteers Advancing Environmental Technology. And we did some things that would, through the Presidential Award of Excellence program, to focus on the things that the members and the member volunteers do that year.
I agree with you that I found that I get more out of ASHRAE than what I ever put into it. It's really a great organization. What was happening in the world, let's say, leading up to your term as president and then since that time?
Well, it was kind of fun. I actually had to go back to the yearbook encyclopedia to pick that up and try to remember some of the things. But just to hit a few of them, that was a year that Ayatollah Khomeini died. That was a year that the Chinese troops opened fire on the pro-democracy demonstrators who were in Tiananmen Square. Tom Foley was elected Speaker of the House. The B-12 bomber, stealth bomber, made its maiden flight. Hungary opened its borders with Austria. Colin Powell was nominated by President Bush as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and he was the first black to hold that post. East Germany opened the Berlin Wall and the rest of its borders. So that was certainly something that we all were pleased and remembered very much. Rajiv Gandhi resigned as the Prime Minister of India. Manuel Noriega surrendered to the U.S. troops. South African government held its first formal talks with what was then the outlawed ANC. Boris Yeltsin was elected president of the Russian Soviet Federation Socialist Republic. And Nolan Ryan of the Texas Rangers pitched his 6th career no-hitter, which was a major league record. So a lot of things going on at that time that really, I think that as far as really significant events would have to be what was taking place in Europe at that time. During that year, we were fortunate enough to go to Sarajevo for a conference that was sponsored by, or co-sponsored by ASHRAE, Klima 2000. And we were in Sarajevo and then to Zagreb and Dubrovnik. And as a matter of fact, I was the last ASHRAE president to go to Yugoslavia because, of course, it no longer exists.
And that was for one of the Climate 2000
right.
meetings.
And then we met with, in Zagreb, we met with some Riva, which is a sister society in Europe. And then we went to Dubrovnik to a heat transfer conference. And, of course, that was, we saw really a very diverse cross-section of the country.
You mentioned during your term of office as volunteerism was your theme. What other items were happening during your term in the way of technical activities or position statements or things along those lines?
Well, of course, the industry challenges at that time, the hot buttons, if you want to call them that, were the CFC issue and ozone depletion. Global warming was beginning to emerge as a real concern. And, of course, energy conservation was an ongoing concern, even though governmental programs had somewhat de-emphasized that, not as an overt action, but as a simple result of them reducing their funding. But still, those issues remain paramount in our industry, and as a matter of fact, still do today, even though we've gone a long way to addressing some of those. But ASHRAE during that year finally issued Standard 62, which is our indoor air quality standard. We issued Standard 90.1, which is our energy conservation standard. And then we issued 2 guidelines. One of them had to do with building commissioning. This is the first time, by the way, that we had issued guidelines. Building commissioning, and the other one had to do with CFCs and alternative classifications, or classifications of alternative CFCs. So those were some significant things that happened that ASHRAE accomplished, rather, during that year.
Now, the guidelines are still being developed and issued. I think we're up to 4 or 5 at this point in society.
I'm not sure exactly where we stand, but the guidelines are still current, and they are being updated on a regular basis, as are our standards, of course.
Now, when you finished your term as president, what have you been doing with the society since that time?
Well, you know, you don't drop off a cliff, as a lot of people say. I've remained very active, and most past presidents do. Automatically, you go into two committees, one being nominating and one being long-range planning. You spend a year as vice chairman of nominating committee, and then a year as chairman. Then you spend a year as a member, and then a year as vice chairman, and another year as chairman of long-range planning committee. At this meeting, I conclude my tenure is on long-range planning committee. Also, I was appointed to the Centennial Committee, which I will be on until it's dismissed. It's an ad hoc committee that will continue through the celebration. And then I chaired the building ad hoc committee that renovated the building that we bought in Atlanta for our headquarters some several years ago. And we renovated it and brought it up to 90.1 standards and standard 62 requirements. So we have an energy efficient, healthy building to set as an example, and so that we can say that, hey, don't do like we say do like we do, you know. And so that was a real challenge and a real kind of a fun committee to work on. And I've continued to be active. In fact, I'm serving on the Indoor Air Quality Conference, which will be in Philadelphia this fall. And I chaired the Far East Conference in Hong Kong in 1992. And I'm sorry, 1991, and I continue to be active at my local chapter. I just finished a year as program chairman, and I also was seminar chairman for a couple of seminars that we had on indoor air quality and CFC all this past year.
That's really great to see you still involved in the chapter, because a lot of times you might think a person who's been through society would not be involved in the chapter anymore. That's really great to see you doing that. At the chapter level, how would you, what kind of advice would you give to a young person, a new college graduate, engineering starting out off in the consulting engineering field, to get them involved in ASHRAE? It's hard today to get people involved.
Yeah, that's true, and not only in ASHRAE, but in so many organizations, volunteerism has had problems getting people. Volunteerism is not the right word, but volunteer organizations have been experiencing quite a bit of difficulty, as a matter of fact, getting people to volunteer. There's so much pressure on people in terms of their time that they have available and things that they can participate in. But I tell the people in our office when they come in to work with us, and I tell students when I speak at Mississippi State or any other university or high school or whatever, that in order to benefit the most, and I mean that not financially so much as I mean just overall in your overall career, the best way to do that is to put something back into your industry, to give something back. You know, we all have drawn on this wealth of information and work that the people before us shared with us through their volunteer efforts. And I think that we should feel free to draw on that, but we have to put something back too. So I always encourage them to participate, and I always tell them that no matter what they put into it, they'll always receive more from it. And I think that most of them, at least in our office, they do enjoy participating, and we encourage them. We give them the time to participate too, and I think that's important. And that's a lot of young people's problems today, that their employers sometimes don't give them the time and don't encourage them to participate.
I think that really sums it up quite well as to how you get somebody involved in ASHRAE. Is to get the employer to encourage it and to help them support that. Good. During your term as the director at large and as a director, I'm sure you were involved in many councils with ASHRAE. Can you tell us a little bit about your involvement in those councils?
Yes, of course. As I was talking earlier, that had served as a director and regional chairman, you know, during that time you actually wear two hats. You are a member of Regions Council, and you bring the concerns and needs of the regions to that council. And then it, of course, is an arm of the board. It can act or it can on certain things or whatever. But then you sit on the board and tend to put on a different hat and you look at things from a different perspective. And I think that's good. And I think it's unique within ASHRAE that we are able to do that. When we're sitting around Regions Council table, then we are really looking after our region. But when we go to the board, we're looking after the society in the overall picture. And that's quite a unique experience if you've never had that. But as I served on some ad hoc committees during that time. I think that, in fact, I remember that ASHRAE really didn't do any fiscal planning as we do now. But the process began while I was on Regions Council, and Dick Perry appointed me as fiscal chairman, fiscal planning subcommittee chairman for Regions Council. And my first question was, what do we do? And, of course, what we did to begin with, we went to a finance workshop that was conducted by Walt Glasser and the Society Treasurer at that time. And that began really the budgeting process that all the committees and councils go through now, which has become very sophisticated. And it's really been quite an evolutionary process. And I learned an awful lot about fiscal planning and fiscal responsibility, I can assure you of that. And then I moved on to when I became director at large, then I was, of course, there again representing the entire society and acted as liaisons and contacts between the board and certain committees and certain councils. And then the years I served as vice president. 1 year I chaired member council, and that was the time when the member council was going through a transitional period from what it used to be to what it is today in terms of the committees that it reported to and the activities that came under under that particular council. Then I also chaired Technology Council, and when you become president-elect, then you automatically chair Regions Council. So not only did I have the opportunity to serve on Regions Council as a regional chairman, I also had the opportunity to serve as a vice chairman and a chairman, as a matter of fact. So those were really neat experiences, and really serving on Technology Council as chair was something that was totally different for me, because you know, ASHRAE is, you kind of go, if you are president, you tend to go from one direction or the other. One direction being through the region chapter and regional activities and the standing committees and that side of the society, as opposed to the TCs and the technical activities of the society. Both can lead to serving on the board or serving as an ASHRAE officer, but I came through the chapter, the regional activities, and the standing committees, having served as on the education committee when I was regional vice chairman for education. But I did have a great experience on Technology Council, and really enjoyed that and really learned a lot about what the ASHRAE volunteers do in that regard. And it's amazing the amount of work that is done by the technical committees, the TCs as we call them. It's just absolutely mind-boggling the hours that these people put in. And these guys come in, and women, they come in, they may get here tonight on a red-eye flight, and then they'll meet all day tomorrow and up until midnight tomorrow night, you know, and then they're gone. And we don't get to see those people as much as we really need to. We don't get to express our appreciation for what they do. And that was one of the things that I wanted to do the year that I was president, in focusing on the contributions that all the volunteers do make. But that was a very enjoyable experience. The other thing that I really enjoyed about being an ASHRAE officer was going to the regional conferences. You know, it's the greatest thing to find, no matter where you are, if you're in Canada or if you're in California, if you're in Florida, New York, there's a common thread that runs through all the chapters and all the regions, and that is that we are all involved in the same type of an industry, the heating, refrigerating, and air conditioning industry. We're involved in that, but the other thread is that you find out that people have a lot of the same values that you have. They have a lot of the same interests that you have. And so when you get together, it's just like being with friends that you've known for a long time. And we were fortunate enough to make return visits to some of the regions. during our years as vice president and then president-elect and president. And I guess I know we made all the regions at least once and some of them twice. And it was really nice to go back and see friends. And then I see some of those same people at society meetings, and Sharon and I both have enjoyed that over the years. And by the way, I did mention Sharon. You know, it's amazing that what the spouses of ASHRAE leaders provide in terms of support, and because it is a very time-consuming job, very demanding in terms of your personal time and your business time. And simply stated, none of us could have done that and made that type of a commitment if we had not had the backing of our spouses. And certainly Sharon was there when I needed her many times when, you know, when you're flying across Afghanistan 40,000 feet in the air, you look out the window and you don't see anything down there, and you say, God, what am I doing here? You know? And that's after you've been out of the country for about 3 weeks, you know? And but she was with me, and she thought she enjoyed it too. It was quite an experience for her, but the support that she gave me, and all the spouses give the leaders, is just something that we really need to recognize. And I think we have made that effort. During that year, we were fortunate enough to travel abroad quite a bit, and we began the year by going to Kuala Lumpur for the Far East Conference that was held that year. And we went from there to Taipei, Taiwan, and chartered a new chapter, the Taipei chapter, or the Taiwan chapter. And then from there we went to Hong Kong and met with the group that was planning the 1991 Far East Conference, and had a delightful experience there. And throughout all of this, anywhere you go, in representing ASHRAE, it never ceases to amaze me the respect that everybody has for the organization. And fortunately, the way that they show that respect is by the way they treat visiting firemen like myself or whoever, and nothing is too good. I mean, really, sometimes we were treated so nicely that it was quite embarrassing, you know. But we have very fond memories. We still have people that we communicate with and write and send Christmas cards to and this type of thing. But we also, as I said earlier, we went to Sarajevo, we were in Yugoslavia, and we were in Australia to attend the ASHRAE conference down there. And then one of the most unique trips that we made was to South Africa to a co-sponsored conference by ASHRAE, and the conference was great. And I remember a lot of things about it, but the thing that I remember the most was the 3 days that we spent in Kruger National Park on a camera safari with a lot of the local members from the group down in South Africa. And that's another whole story, and I won't go into that, but it was phenomenal just to be there. I think that, I think we were in Hawaii like maybe 3 times that year, and we were in Canada, and I don't think I've missed a country. But as I said, throughout all of that, the common response that we got was one of great respect and for the organization of ASHRAE and what it does and what it has accomplished. And, it really was significant to me, I think, because we take ASHRAE so for granted. I always have. And the information is right at our fingertips. We get our journal in a timely fashion. We get our handbooks. And if we have questions, we have people we can call, and they can do a little research for us at society or whatever. But the people around the world are not that fortunate. And I think they appreciate ASHRAE much more than we do. We could take some lessons from them, no doubt. The other thing that was kind of neat that year, ASHRAE was the lead sponsoring organization for National Engineers Week. And that year we introduced the Discover E program. And I served as chairman since I was ASHRAE president. And the co-chairman that year was Stephen Bechtel with the Bechtel Group. And it was really an experience meeting him and traveling with him. And we, during the National Engineers Week celebration, we met with President Bush in the Oval Office, and he had a proclamation. We gave him a proclamation, and he was very nice to listen to some of the concerns that we had. And I was fortunate enough to do what we call teach-ins in Clinton High School, which is near Jackson, Mississippi. and I did one at a school in Atlanta, one in a Washington, D.C. school, Rochester, New York, Lincoln, Nebraska, all during that week. And it was quite a hectic week of traveling and what have you, but it was real exciting, and it really gave me an appreciation for what engineers do and what ASHRAE, what contributions ASHRAE has made to the overall quality of life.
Sounds like you really had an exciting time during your term as president, with the travel and the people that you got to meet and all the events you attended. It sounded great. It sounded really interesting. Tell me a little bit about anybody that may have had some influence on your life, getting you involved, let's say, in engineering. How did you decide to become an engineer?
Well, I started my career in engineering because I was tired of delivering newspapers. It's a true story. And it just so happened that on my newspaper route, there lived an architect and an engineer. And they also had their offices on my newspaper route. And, you know, I'd been cutting their grass and delivering the newspapers for years, you know, and I was kind of a cocky kid, you know, and I walked into the engineer's office one day and to give his paper so I wouldn't have to climb the hill to his house. And he carried me back to the drafting room, you know, and I wanted to look around a little bit. And they had some guy that they had just started off working. You know, at this point in time, I'm like 15 years old. No, I was young. 14. I didn't even have a driver's license. I was 14 years old. And I looked at what the guy had done. I said, I can do that. And he says, well, whenever you get tired of delivering newspapers, he says, we'll let you do this. And it took me about 2 hours. By the time I got home, I decided I wanted to change careers. So I quit. Went to work for this guy, and for 6 months, all I did was sweep the floors, take out the trash, you know, run errands, make the coffee. And then when I wasn't doing that, they had me lettering. I'd never had any drafting courses. They had me learning how to letter. You know, we don't even do that nowadays. Everything is CAD. But anyway, I literally learned through that process, you know, and it was really neat that they were able to provide that opportunity to have that kind of an impact on my life. And I decided I really liked what these people were doing. And back in those days, we didn't do a lot of air conditioning, and the way we did the heating and ventilating was very unsophisticated. But yet, we always had the ASHRAE handbook on the desk when we were doing load calculations or anything else. And I never will forget the advice that my first employer gave me was that he brought me the ASHRAE handbook, and he said, if you do what the ASHRAE handbook tells you to do, you'll never have any problems. And if you do have problems, then you've always got a resource that you can say, well, I did it according to the experts. So that started me thinking, you know, of course it wasn't ASHRAE back then, it was ASHPE. I said, well, those guys, you know, it must be really sharp, you know. I went on through high school working for the same group, and then I went to 2 years of community college in my hometown of Meridian, and then went to Mississippi State. When I went to State, I worked for a consulting engineer named George Ramsey. George had moved to Starkville from Memphis, where he had worked for a number of years. And I remember every month, George would get in his car and drive 120 miles each way to Jackson, Mississippi, to go to the ASHRAE chapter meeting. Today it's only like a 2 hour and 10-minute drive. Back in those days, because of the roads and what have you, it was a good 3 hour drive each way. You know, I really couldn't understand why anybody would do that. But he's felt like that he derived so much from that participation, and he learned so much from it that he made that commitment. And he always went to the ASHRAE annual and winter meetings. And I just saw that commitment that he had. And really, George, he served as a chapter officer in Memphis and this when he was up there and this sort of thing, but he never got involved in society activities except coming to the meetings and going to the sessions and that type of thing. But he really had an impact on my life, because anybody that would do what he did to make those meetings, it really had to be something good. So, unfortunately, when I graduated from school, I was in Meridian, and I did not have a chapter that I could attend. But when I moved to Jackson, you know, I was encouraged to join, and did join in 1968, and have been going to meetings and active ever since.
And the rest is history, right?
Right, the rest is history.
That's good. Would you like to have any closing remarks or summarize things, any recommendations you'd have for people? Sure, the floor is yours, whatever you'd like to say.
Well, well, I still believe that as I did when I was turning over my mind, what did I want to focus on during 89 and 90, I am still convinced that the human resources that we have within ASHRAE are the best in the world and the most important resource that we have. And I think that we need to do things that make participation in the society activities more accessible for more people. I think that also, and I firmly believe that we're in an era that we need to consider, I think the buzzword is diversity. We need to make sure that every person, no matter what their race or what their gender is, has the opportunity to serve ASHRAE and to participate in ASHRAE. The most overriding thing that I hope continues is that people realize what they gain from giving something to ASHRAE, or you want to do that. Not because you have to. And I hope that will continue, that volunteer spirit that we have in ASHRAE will continue. And you know, it's kind of ironic. I also believe that the people who really do the work, you never hear about them. Their stories are not told, and their songs are not sung, but they're the people in the trenches, and they've built our technology over the years. You know, kind of like the C-bills, the Carl tolls, and I just wish there was some way that we could recognize each and every person throughout ASHRAE and throughout history that have made these significant contributions.
And thank you, David Butler. I appreciate you sharing with us your recalling of your leadership in ASHRAE. Thank you very much.
Thank you.